Today we're going to talk about Module 4, the need for psychological science. This should be a quick video, so let's get to it. So the question is it common science? Is it common sense? Is it scientific? Or is it both? So sometimes there are things that we consider common sense that are correct, and sometimes those things are incorrect. So for example, some of you may have heard the phrase that we only use 10% of our brain. You may have also heard that some people are left-brained and some people are right-brained. As we'll learn in this class, those things are what we would consider common sense, but those things are not actually true. Research does not support those ideas. So sometimes things that we think make sense aren't actually accurate. Also, sometimes things seem like common sense because they're just repeated frequently. So when we repeat statements or hear them repeatedly, this makes those ideas easier to process and remember, which then makes us think that they're more true because they're easier for us to recall. So for example, vitamin C preventing the common cold. Research doesn't support that is very true, but it's repeated frequently enough that there's businesses that make a lot of money selling you vitamin C products. So there are a couple of psychological phenomena that explain the reason why we need psychological science. There are 3 that we're going to talk about today. First of all is hindsight bias. So how many of you, if you thought that before the election, if you thought that President Biden would be elected in this year's election, write down yes. Now, hindsight bias is something that we do as humans where after an outcome has already happened, we believe that we would have predicted that. So for example, let's say you are watching 2 cars drive and you witness a car crash, and after the fact you said, I knew that was going to happen. That would be an example of hindsight bias, where this is also known as the I knew it all along phenomenon. So it's the idea that you could have predicted that this thing would have happened, but in all likelihood, you are only saying that or think that because that's the outcome that's already happened. So an issue with hindsight bias is that sometimes we use this on two different things that are contradictory. So for example, they did a study where they had people be told a scientific fact that when couples are separated by distance, it worsens a relationship. The idea of out of sight, out of mind. And when participants were asked how surprising that was to them, they said that wasn't surprising at all, that they already knew that they could have predicted that. If you took another random group of people and told them the opposite, that when 2 people in a couple are separated, it actually increases attractiveness or longing, and you told them absence makes the heart grow fonder, those people would also say that that's not surprising and that they could have predicted that. But the problem, if you see here, is that those 2 things directly contradict each other. So just because sometimes things make common sense or they are something that we think we could predict, it doesn't make it true. And over 800 research papers in the world have shown that hindsight bias is present in all types of people, young people, old people, all over the world. So the thing is that common sense isn't always wrong. And a lot of times it is correct. But common sense is good for describing what's already happened, not good for describing what will happen or predicting what will happen. And this is why we need scientific psychological research, because when we do have that, when we actually do rigorous scientific testing, we can make predictions about behavior based on the data. Another reason why we need scientific research is another human phenomenon called overconfidence. So basically, people in general tend to think they know more than they really do. um, so I don't know if you've ever seen the Jimmy Kimmel skit where they ask people on the street about, random facts. Who is our president? Who is the state senator? Where is, I don't know, Mexico? Questions like that, factual questions. What psychologists have found is that humans tend to be a lot more confident in their answers than they are actually correct, which is kind of funny. So just because someone is telling you a fact and they seem very confident in that fact doesn't mean it's true. So the psychologist Philip Tetlock, he collected more than 27,000 expert predictions. So predictions from people who are experts in geopolitics. And he asked them to make predictions of world events, such as the future of South Africa or whether Quebec would separate from Canada. And what he found was that these predictions, which experts made with 80% confidence on average. So, on average, people thought that they were going to be correct about 80%. They were confident, like, I would say I'm 80% sure. Okay. Only 40% or less of them were actually correct as to what would happen. So, double the amount of people that were actually correct were confident. So just because somebody has confidence in what they're claiming doesn't mean really much. And even those who are wrong, when confronted with the fact that they were wrong, well, they said, well, they were almost right. And then lastly, perceiving order in random events. So for most of us, the idea of a completely chaotic, unpredictable world is very anxiety inducing. Humans, it's part of our human nature. We want to make sense of the world. So we may see a face in the clouds. We may hear satanic messages and music. We may, I don't know, see something in a cloud of dust. Something. We like to perceive patterns, even when there's not patterns there. And researchers have found this. Even in random data, humans often will find patterns even when there aren't any, because random sequences often don't look very random. So, for example, this happens a lot of the times with kids. I use a randomized test generator, which means that the answer key randomly assigns it, or the computer randomly assigns the questions and the answers in the order. And oftentimes what will happen in these random sequences is there will be streaks of like C, 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 or D, 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 all in one streak. And kids often think that that's not possible to happen if it's truly randomized. So they'll second guess themselves and they will change their answers because it's too many C's in a row. But that can happen in a random sequence. So the whole point to remember in this is that hindsight bias, overconfidence, and our tendency to perceive patterns in random events tempt us to overestimate the value of common sense and common sense thinking. But scientific inquiry can really help us sift reality from common sense or illusion. So in our next module, we'll talk more about that. Lastly, I'd like you to answer these test yourself questions in your notes, and we will discuss them in class. See you later, guys.